My name is Tom Fain. I'm your senior judge today, and I am a retired securities lawyer. I will ask the other judges now to introduce themselves, please. Autumn?
Hello, everyone. My name is Autumn Moody, and I'm the VP and General Counsel for Talglass USA.
And Robert?
There we go. Hi, I am Robert Bittner. I am a retired communications satellite designer and producer.
My name is Freed Mosier. I'm an event producer based in Austin, Texas. I was formerly with C3 Presents, owned by Live Nation, and ESPN, working on the X Games, and now I manage my own company called Barnstorm, focused on guest services, accessibility, sustainability, and community outreach programs at mostly major music festivals.
Okay, I've been asked to read this opening statement. I think most of you know this already, so I'll truncate it a little bit. As part of today's competition, you are taking on a fictional business identity and assigning fictional business identity to your judges. You will have 25 minutes to describe the legal, financial, and ethical dimensions of the problem and to recommend a solution that passes muster on all three counts. During this time, you will not be interrupted. When you are finished, the judges will ask you questions for 10 or 15 minutes. Do not be dismayed if we don't ask you any questions, because that does not indicate a lack of interest. That indicates excellence in your presentation, and we therefore have no questions. But I expect we'll have some, since we have at least 2 lawyers on this panel. You're bound to get something. After the questions, we'll have 10 or 15 minutes for feedback. And with that, please begin.
Good morning, Jimmy Choo's Board of Directors. We are here from District Consultants to discuss your corporate social responsibility report and how your brand can truly commit to action. Let us introduce ourselves. My name is Emily Rosenkrantz, and I am a business development consultant with the District Consultants team. Here with me this morning is Alexa Williamson, our ethical operations consultant. We also had a third member on our team, Aitana Week-Mondajar, who unfortunately could not be with us today. Now, let me pass it along to my colleague Alexa to introduce the issue.
Capri Holdings released a corporate responsibility statement in 2020 with ambitious goals for their company to reach by 2025. Although the specifics of the statement do lack some clarity, Jimmy Choo, Versace, and Michael Kors are all very different children of the same parent, and therefore it would be beneficial for Jimmy Choo to outline goals that would apply directly to them. To what extent are these goals viable? Where do we see fit for Jimmy Choo's improvement in efforts to better benefit Jimmy Choo as a brand and as a sustainable leader? And how can offsetting these implications help promote sustainable communities and cities? So let's start understanding the issue. But before we get into talking about it, we would like to make note of a few changes regarding our executive summary. As we carried out and continued our research, we've decided to stray a bit from the 3 recommendations you might see in our summary. We at District Consultants are dedicated to providing companies like you with the best solutions and recommendations for sustainability and ethical practices. Therefore, we hope you can understand our process. Today, we're going to analyze 3 areas within Capri Holdings' 2020 statement regarding waste, materials, and lack of transparency, and efforts to offset environmental hazards and tailor this program specifically to Jimmy Choo. Our objective? To further analyze and improve within this CSR statement and create attainable, cost-efficient goals for Jimmy Choo to achieve Capri Holdings metrics and improve overall brand equity. So our key areas of recommendation. We urge Jimmy Choo to innovate, invest, and inform to keep Jimmy Choo in the game. Innovate by spearheading new methods of decreasing waste. Invest in new biodegradable and bio-based materials, and inform consumers about the materials and products while reporting company efforts towards sustainable development. These sustainable solutions allow for stronger communities from a local to global level by offsetting excess fossil fuel emissions, which are more prevalently felt in urban communities. And now my colleague Emily will walk you through our first recommendation, innovate.
Great. Thank you, Alexa, for the introduction. I'll be speaking about our first recommendation, innovation. But let's discuss why we need to innovate in the first place. When reading through your parent company's CSR, we noted that Jimmy Choo is falling behind in waste reduction. Capri Holdings, the parent company, has committed to 100% recyclable, compostable, and or reusable packaging by 2025, which is certainly a great goal in itself. However, they could only commit to a 25% reduction in direct operation waste in the same timeframe. To clarify, direct operation waste refers to waste generated from facilities that the company directly owns. We want to help your company overcome this ethical dissonance and help you become an industry leader in total waste reduction. We believe that to take action within this dissonance, Jimmy Choo can do better with a recollection and redistribution program. Before we get into the specifics about how this program works and why it's a good idea, let's go over the financial, legal, and ethical implications of this solution more broadly. Financially, this would enable savings through charitable tax deductions, as well as opening up the possibility of a new revenue stream. We will go over the finances in a future slide. Legally, Jimmy Choo would be adhering to the California Recycling Market Development Act, which was passed in 2019 to help the state of California develop a comprehensive market plan to stimulate demand for post-consumer waste. As a fashion brand that certainly develops waste, and while we don't suggest that zero waste is the most ethical goal, Jimmy Choo has a responsibility to legally adhere to this act and its stipulations. Ethically, a recollection and redistribution program would allow Jimmy Choo to harness their brand power for positive socio-environmental influence, benefiting people and planet. Let's explain how this recollection and redistribution program works. First, consumers bring in clothing and shoes they wish to donate at the point of sale, which in this case would be Jimmy Choo's retail locations. Note that donations do not have to strictly be Jimmy Choo items. They can just be any clothing and shoes that consumers are willing to part with. Next, fashion companies with these programs normally partner with another nonprofit or company that manages the sorting and distribution of donations. These companies sort through donations and assess quality and value to determine the future use. If quality is assessed to be good of a specific item and it's fit for rewear the way that it is, they could be sold secondhand on a market, or they could be donated to charities where new consumers would not have to pay. It would just be a charitable donation. Alternatively, if the textile or donation is not fit to be resold in the quality that it currently is, as opposed to ending up in a landfill, it can be recycled for industrial purposes, such as housing insulation, or broken down back into yarn and used for new garments. Specifically, this recommendation is inspired by our competitive analysis of Jimmy Choo's market peers, who have shown that they are already ahead of the game with installing similar programs. H&M collected over 29,000 tons of textiles in 2019, which equates to about 145 million t-shirts. Madewell uses returned denim and directly turns it into housing insulation, especially in impoverished communities. Calzedonia is an early pioneer of this program, having run it successfully for nearly 10 years now. Lastly, Levi's takes a community engagement approach and uses materials donated to contribute directly to the communities they work within. It's important to discuss the costs and benefits of this program in more detail. Moving all the way to the left, you'll see that tax deductions are the major benefit of this program. Many of you know that as a citizen taxpayer, you can receive tax deductions by writing off charitable donations. This applies to corporations as well. Using our financial analysis in the appendix, which we'll be happy to expand upon in the Q&A session, using 2019 data as well as estimated fair market value and what we can expect of revenue to be returned, we estimate that tax deductions would be just under $2 million per year. Moving all the way to the right, you'll see another benefit is the possibility of a new revenue stream. Other luxury brands have opened up this revenue stream in which consumers that own specifically branded shoes or clothes and no longer want them, bring them into a retail shop. The retail shop then gives them what they believe is the fair value for the donation. Then they can resell it directly through the store and offer these products to consumers who are not willing to pay the normal price for higher end goods, but instead are interested in used brands. Research shows that these programs don't detract from new goods sales, but instead opens up a new target market. Focusing in the middle, we also want to discuss the cost of this program. Many partners, such as nonprofit Souls for Souls that run recollection and redistribution programs in conjunction with fashion brands, don't actually charge them for the sorting and distribution of their clothes. Therefore, Jimmy Choo's only real cost would be the transportation from store to distribution center, which we estimate to be just under $160,000 per year. The outcomes of the recollection and redistribution program hit the CSR issue on the head, namely that it identifies these broad strategies without real metrics to provide updates on progress. There are a number of key performance indicators that would come out of this program, including participation by geographic segment. Jimmy Choo stores are highly concentrated in a number of regions throughout the United States. We want to see through this program where consumers are most receptive to sustainability efforts, including this program, and how that information can inform Jimmy Choo's future efforts. Secondly, as we noted before, donations can end up on a variety of paths based on quality and value. Jimmy Choo can monitor item quality by evaluating the amount of clothes that are fit for resale. Lastly, Jimmy Choo can use the metric of contribution to communities. Since we noted that one of the paths for these donations is that they're given directly to communities in need as a charitable donation, estimating the value of these contributions gives Jimmy Choo a tangible way to estimate their social good. Now I'm going to pass it along back to my colleague Alexa to discuss our second recommendation.
It is time for Jimmy Choo to enhance plans for sustainable raw material usage through further investments in new research. Therefore, we suggest to invest. The CSR statement mentions the use of leather in Capri Holdings products. While they have placed a focus on ethically sourced materials, it is apparent that there is a lack of diverse raw materials in production, and they're missing out on increasing demand for sustainable alternatives. Jimmy Choo has a history of using hazardous materials, and here are two petroleum-based examples. PVC is a plastic polymer commonly used in pleathers, but also can be used in luxury shoes to create a flexible, transparent material. It has been deemed by the EPA as a known human carcinogen and has been slowly phased out of production due to EPA legal regulations. PVC poses great threats to human life and surrounding ecosystems as it has a long lifespan and releases harmful toxins throughout that lifespan as it deteriorates over time. The company has also decided to stop using fur as of 2017, which suggests that the fur that they use in their products is faux fur, although they never stated exactly what they have replaced that use of fur with. The majority of faux furs used are petroleum-based, which causes the emissions of fossil fuels polluting surrounding cities. In addition, the care process of faux fur releases microfibers with each wash, which results in poisoning cities and the oceans and other bodies of water, therefore harming ecosystems. But don't worry, we have some alternatives for you to explore. We want to note that we're not here today to ask you to make a drastic shift to only using these materials, but instead to invest in these biodegradable alternatives and start incorporating them into your lines and your designs. Marymount is a cost-competitive biodegradable leather made from hemp and cork powder. Allbirds, a pioneer for sustainable shoe design, have already invested $2 million in Marymount, as they noticed that it is a truly notable startup. Z from Zoa is a biofabric made from proteins and bio-based polymers, and they are predicted to have an 80% offset of greenhouse gases compared to the traditional leather, and 30% compared to non-bio-based synthetic leather, such as PVC. EcoPels Koba is the first commercially available faux fur using bio-based ingredients. So this is what a sustainable line can look like for Jimmy Choo. Sustainable is the new sexy. Imagine a summer line of sustainable shoes. It sets Jimmy Choo apart while creating a sustainable impact. The outcomes of this suggestion will help people and the planet. Investments like these will offset those hazardous toxins produced by petroleum-based raw materials. Also, happy consumers. A survey showed that 67% of customers and consumers consider the use of sustainable materials in fashion to be an important purchasing factor. And finally, future-proofing and brand equity. With changing markets and a changing world, adapting is essential to future-proofing the brand and enhancing brand equity. Which leads us to our third recommendation, inform. The 2020 CSR statement briefly mentions the importance of transparency, but fails to mention the specific steps for how they are going to meet the various metrics presented in their statement by 2025. That is why we have a proposal for quarterly public updates on sustainable goals for Jimmy Choo. These quarterly updates must include these three components: a statement of short-term goals with estimate goal progress reports throughout each quarter, an environmental profit and loss report, which is a sustainable transparency initiative started by Kering, the parent of luxury brands such as Gucci. And it is a tool for measuring environmental impacts and actions, and it is intended to enhance transparency while establishing clean strategic decisions. And finally, materials used. The CSR statement mentions the desire to phase out all hazardous chemicals by 2025, but does not specify the process, nor do they disclose to consumers if hazardous chemicals are still currently being used. For example, the Jimmy Choo website no longer explicitly states the use of PVC in their products, but they also never specified what they were using instead, nor have they mentioned if they have truly phased it out. There needs to be statements regarding which chemicals and materials are being used in order to promote transparency for consumers. Now my colleague Emily will continue this recommendation.
Thank you, Alexa. We want to make a special note that this recommendation is not just based on what we think your company should be doing or would be the right thing to do. In addition to this, it's based off of hardcore market data. Demanding transparency is a new trend among consumers, and it's increasingly growing larger. If you look at the diagram on the left, this is a generational breakdown of consumers who indicate that they research a brand before buying. Millennials lead the charge at about 52%, Gen Z is about 45%, and baby boomers are about 41%. Millennials and Gen Z currently make up a third of the luxury clothing brand market, and by 2025, they will surpass this to become the majority. Looking on the right, these statistics show that consumers want to put their money where their mouth is, and they believe brands should be doing the same. 66% of consumers are willing to pay more to purchase from brands they believe are doing good from the world. This can't be assessed on a consumer basis if they don't know what a brand is doing. The bottom statistic indicates that 69% of consumers say they want to know how their clothing was manufactured. This is a 10% increase from 2018, and we believe that this trend is going to continue. Let's focus on the ethical and legal implications of quarterly sustainable updates. Ethically, allowing for more accessible information helps Jimmy Choo embrace a stakeholder framework as opposed to a merely shareholder framework. As the decisions that Jimmy Choo is making as a major manufacturer and seller of fashion items, these decisions have ramifications beyond just those who are financially invested in the company. Without accessible information, communities and other stakeholders are not enabled to make clear, thorough decisions. Moving on to legal implications, Jimmy Choo is currently a signatory of the G7 Fashion Pact. While this pact is not a legally obliging group, it is a good idea for Jimmy Choo to demonstrate a continued passion for being part of this G7 Fashion Pact, as they have already demonstrated their wish to be a member. The G7 Fashion Pact is a collection of luxury and high-end clothing retailers from around the world dedicated to proving the SDG's UN goals, and they put a special emphasis on transparency and accountability within luxury brands. If Jimmy Choo does not follow through by enhancing their transparency, then there's an extreme ethical dissonance between what they say they will do and what they actually do. Secondly, Jimmy Choo would be adhering to the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act, which was passed in the 1980s and requires manufacturers and stores of hazardous materials to provide accurate, up-to-date information about what they have and what they're doing with it. Although we don't have any evidence to believe that Jimmy Choo is currently violating this law, by providing accurate and recent information, we can verify that they are no longer at risk of violating it. To discuss the outcomes of quarterly sustainable updates, namely, this opportunity allows Jimmy Choo to become an industry leader and get ahead in the growing sustainable luxury brand market. They would act as a role model among their competitors and no longer be left in the dust. They would be taking advantage of growing consumer demand, as we noted with demographic data just a few slides ago. Thirdly, they would be enhancing brand equity by signaling to consumers that they want to increase the semantic value of what they sell and that consumers should be receptive to that. Before we wrap up, we want to note that our recommendations meet several SDGs. While we focused on SDG 11, which pertains to sustainable cities and communities, we believe that sustainable development should not exist in a silo, and many of these goals intersect and work together. For example, you'll note that our recommendations also heavily touch on SDG 9, which refers to industry, innovation, and infrastructure, 12, which refers to responsible consumption and production, 17, which refers to partnerships for the goals, as well as several others. We really do believe that sustainable development cannot exist by one person or one strategy alone. To wrap up, we want to share why we believe by our recommendations and why we think they're a strong fit for your company's CSR advancement. They're proactive. These strategies are based on how we know the market is going to change. They're not short-term Band-Aid fix for the problems that your company has already come with. They're pro-social. These recommendations encourage partnerships with nonprofits, communities, market peers, and other stakeholders, showing that Jimmy Choo is happy to collaborate because it genuinely contributes for the betterment of the world around them. Lastly, they're probable. We included plenty of ethical, financial, and legal evidence, but several of our recommendations, especially the recollection and redistribution program, have already been installed by market peers. We want to ensure that Jimmy Choo doesn't lose their foothold any further. We want to make sure they stay competitive in an increasingly growing market. Thank you very much, and we are now prepared to take your questions.
Okay, the protocol for this program suggests that the senior judge, that's me, ask the first question and it somehow be related to the ethical problem. And then we'll follow on with the other judges. You used the term in one of your slides, stakeholder role in the decision-making. Who are these stakeholders you're talking about?
So the stakeholders that we're specifically pertaining to in line with SDG 11 are the cities and communities that Jimmy Choo is working within. So we note that many of the retail stores exist within wealthier communities, but we also touch more on the manufacturing sites, which are located around the world based on where Capri Holdings, the parent company, is locating their manufacturing. But we also want to note that with this recollection and redistribution program, there's transportation of goods happening on a larger scale. And with quarterly sustainable updates, that program would become a larger part of what Jimmy Choo is reporting upon. Communities need to be aware of what's going on in terms of industry impact in sustainable decision-making. And Jimmy Choo would be a more socially responsible company to show that they care not just about those who have a financially vested interest in their company, but everyone else that has a tangible impact from their actions.
So from that, do we conclude that all commercial enterprises have obligations to the places where they live? Is that your argument?
Under a stakeholder framework, and given that I am a generally optimistic person, I would say yes. I think if companies are using resources in the communities that they exist within and leaving behind tangible environmental impacts, they have a tangible responsibility to at least be honest about what they're doing. That may be difficult, and I admit it's hard to convince these companies that they should be doing, but according to ethical frameworks, namely the stakeholder framework, that is what they ought to be doing.
What's the economic impact of all of this, assuming that it's implemented?
So we did touch upon the financial and, actually, let me head back to our appendix. My bad, I went to the wrong section. Here, we have the cost benefit analysis specifically of recommendation 1, which is innovating through a recollection and redistribution program. I'm happy to open up the financial analysis. It's in a separate sheet and I can run through how I got these numbers.
Well, let's be more basic than that. I understand that the tax deductions are the result of Jimmy Choo donating back the items that are brought to it to some nonprofit. Have I captured that right or wrong?
Yes.
Okay, one final question before I pass it on to the other judges. What makes you think that consumers are going to actually get off their chair and bring this stuff back to the store?
Because it's already worked successfully with a number of brand peers. Let me go back. H&M, Obviously, they are a little bit different to Jimmy Choo in what they sell and what consumers they attract. They also operate on a larger scale, but they were able to collect in just 1 year the equivalent of 145 million t-shirts. I don't know about you, but that seems like a pretty massive scale to me. Additionally, a number of these competitors also incentivize donations. They give consumers who donate them either a percentage off of new purchases or some other discount to encourage them to bring in donations. We did offer this as part of the process. And we also have it in our risk identification slide that if there is a risk of consumers not participating as much as Jimmy Choo expected, incentivizing could be a way to mitigate this risk.
Okay, I'll yield the floor to Autumn. You have any questions?
Thank you for the presentation. I do have a question regarding, you brought up the legal category, and I was curious if you have looked into or have knowledge about the risks of violating that Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act.
Sure. I also don't want to feel like I'm hogging the mic from my partner. It's just that the questions that you're asking about pertain to research that I specifically did. So I want to make sure I'm giving you guys a qualified answer. If you ask me what specific fines and legal punishments go into violating this act, I couldn't give you a specific number. I can just imagine that as this is an EPA act that has existed for, I believe, nearly 5 decades now, it's well established. The EPA knows what to look for in terms of major companies that violate it, how to assess the damage and penalize them correctly. So I would advise Jimmy Choo and you as the board of directors to pay attention to this act and understand that the risks of violating them should not be ignored.
Okay, and then I had one other question. Regarding some of the recommendations that you had in changing the raw materials that were being used, do you have, did you make an assessment of the time frame involved to make those types of changes and the cost that it would cost the company?
Go ahead, Alexa.
Yeah, so I believe, right. So as these companies are up and coming, having seen what Allbirds has done from making investments, I guess the design is more of like a longer term approach, but as far as making the investments, it's more of like pushing towards starting and getting that foot in the water and trying to actually get it going. Like our template for a design, it was for June 2021. Of course, that wouldn't be the date. That's very quick, but it's something that a lot of people are getting into, and especially with the luxury market going to be back on the up as of 2022, because right now, because of the pandemic, it's kind of on a slope down. People don't want to buy luxury goods, especially with the people.
I agree with everything my colleague said, and I'd like to note that when it comes to working with these alternatives specifically, when it comes to estimating costs, they're highly subjective depending on the brand and to what scale they'd like to integrate them in their operations. Marymount says that they are cost competitive, and I'd like to believe they hold faith in that. It's just without knowing the specific details of how your company would like to proceed with this, we wanted to give a general recommendation that it would be a good idea to proceed in the first place, but it's nearly impossible to get specific cost data without knowing exactly to what extent you would like to proceed with it. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
Shall we move to Robert? Do you have any questions?
My co-judges have been highly efficient in asking great questions. So I'll just come in with a generic. You did not address much risk in the slides. So was there any other risk elements that you think we need to know related to taking this path or perceived ROI for taking on these new materials, including these new processes?
Yes, I'm glad you asked that actually, because we do have risk identification and mitigation included in our appendix. So the first risk, which is one that I noted before, pertains specifically to recommendation 1 about the recollection and redistribution program. So the risk is that consumer participation is lower than expected. That is namely a risk, and that it affects how much tax deductions we can prepare for. So one way that we would overcome this risk is, as I said before, offering an incentive for participation. This may have other financial ramifications in that we may not be selling new goods as high of a price as we would get for full price, but it would, as most discounts do, we can expect that consumers are more inclined to spend money on new goods if they have this discount. Our second risk is that the cost of transportation, specifically with this recollection program, is higher than expected. The way that we calculated cost of transportation is by evaluating the distance between each Jimmy Choo store, the nearest collection center for this partner Souls for Souls that would act as the nonprofit to sort and distribute clothing. So if we believe that fuel prices are going to explode or something else that would just dramatically affect the prices, we can combine routes, because what we found is that many Jimmy Choo stores, as we mentioned before, are very close to each other. Jimmy Choo, their retail strategy is to just have many stores located within the same generally affluent areas. If you think like Beverly Hills, New York City, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So we can overcome increasing costs of transportation by having stores combine their goods and making fewer trips to these collection centers.
Thank you.
Anything else, Robert? Is that it?
That's it from me.
Okay, Fareed, you're next. And I want to remind you that after the question and answer period, we have a little feedback where we can be either critical or complimentary of these panel members as our conscience guides us. And if you wouldn't mind, ask your questions and then transition right into your feedback, and then we'll go on back up the chain.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you for the presentation. It was informative and wonderful. Going back to the issue, just so I can have a better understanding of how the connection between the issue relates to the solutions that you're proposing. One of the items you mentioned was the idea of Jimmy Choo not managing their waste. They're generating too much waste. Is that specifically talking about the PVC and the fox fur, or I was having trouble understanding how the waste is actually being generated, and then some of these solutions like recollection and redistribution, how that actually addresses the waste issue, which is that the main issue that you're focusing on?
So I'm going to start by talking about how the recollection and redistribution program affects the waste issue, and then I'm going to pass it along to Alexa to speak more about PVC and faux fur specifically, since those are the respective topics that we spent a lot of time on, each one of us. So the recollection and redistribution program is meant to overcome a huge issue, not just within Jimmy Choo, but within sustainable textiles overall, where an overwhelmingly large portion of textiles are ending up in landfills, where instead there are so many other sustainable alternatives. And Jimmy Choo as a company has this great opportunity to help overcome their direct operation waste failures in installing this program. And instead, there are many other sustainable paths that we identify that they could go towards, whether we said being sold on a secondhand market, donating them to charitable organizations, returning them to be used in new garments, basically any option that is more sustainable than keeping them out of the landfills. And we don't want to peg that issue on your company specifically, because it's certainly an issue that so many other companies contribute to. But you can make this change to help create sustainable impact within your own company and employ all of these other benefits as well. So I'm going to pass it to Alexa to speak specifically about the PVC and fur issue you brought up.
Right, so in the CSR statement, they talk about wanting to reduce waste from indirect operations, and something that we noticed is the direct operations were almost neglected. And in terms of the raw materials and waste, so Capri Holdings, they're focusing a lot on leather, like regular leather and ethically sourced leather. But the in terms of waste that we were focusing on here is more about the production of the raw materials and the fossil fuel emissions that are given off in creating them. So PVC is petroleum-based, FOFR is a petroleum-based as well. So, and those were two examples that we used, but that was basically where we were going with that, the fossil fuel emissions from producing petroleum-based alternatives that are supposedly more sustainable and better for the environment are actually just polluting more. And in order to promote sustainable cities and communities, it would be wise to invest in alternatives that do not do that. So that would be the biodegradables. And also there is a issue with these materials ending up in those as being waste in locations like that. With having that happen, petroleum-based materials, they end up, as they deteriorate, they give off harmful toxins that pose huge public health issues. So as they deteriorate, they're giving off these toxins that have been linked to various ethical issues, such as like a lot of issues with children. There was an IBESCC study for that. And just by going for these alternatives, we're able to reduce that waste from the production of raw materials.
And since one of our recommendations is talking about transparency, I think we should hold up to our word, my pardon. I want to reiterate that our executive summary that you might be seeing it doesn't match exactly to the contents of that presentation. That's because after we did the executive summary, we determined that there are bigger issues to tackle than PVC, because Jimmy Choo is being vague about PVC, right? They said that they're phasing it out. We're not really sure what they're using instead. And that instead to us signaled a bigger issue, which are the issues that we tackled instead. So we just want to make it clear that we wanted to incorporate all of the research that we did before submitting our executive summary into this presentation because it's all still relevant, but we didn't want to leave you with strategies that we didn't have faith in.
Thank you. So that addresses the waste connection. I believe you mentioned that it's kind of a twofold, like that the aftermarket, the recollection and redistribution focuses on collecting products that are already out there, and then you're also focusing on the fossil fuel waste generated through development of products. One question on the recollection and redistribution program. I know you mentioned like H&M and some of the programs that are already in place. Like an H&M collects textiles and whatnot that don't have to be from H&M, whereas like a Patagonia, they'll take on worn wear products that are their own. Do you recommend your strategy being a comprehensive collection of every type of material so that you can repurpose it or take advantage of tax benefits, or is it more focused on the Jimmy Choo specific brand?
So it's a little bit of both, to be honest. So our generic recommendation, the overarching idea of the strategy is that they employ an H&M like model, as you said, where they collect clothing and shoes from any sale point. However, when we did talk about this new revenue stream, let me hop ahead. So on the right box here, this was inspired by, I believe, from what you described from Patagonia, it sounds similar to the research that we did into REI, where they take specifically branded goods and then offer that up as verified resale. But the recollection and redistribution itself would be open to donations from textiles of any manufacturer, just clothing and shoes that consumers are happy to donate.
Okay, and employing this would be a whole new set of investment as far as people to collect all this stuff, and is that factored into the financial analysis as well too?
We did not factor it into this number that you see in the middle here because it solely focuses on the main recollection and redistribution program, being that consumers bring in the clothing and shoes from any manufacturer, and then Jimmy Choo works with this nonprofit to transport them to a distribution center. We wanted to offer this possibility of a new revenue stream as a complementary option to offset costs. So while we don't have specific financial data, we have seen from other competitors that it works well and it accesses new target markets that they weren't able to access because they're a high-end marketer.
Great. One last question for me. You talked about the ethical dilemma and showcasing progress through establishing short-term goals, profit loss, and so on. When we talk about progress, there is also a need to focus on where we're at now as a business, which I believe Jimmy Choo we're not currently doing, right? We're not being transparent with where we're at right now. How do you feel that's going to affect current business if we were to share data, be transparent about how we operate now, how we are using certain products now? And do you still feel like the positive benefits of sharing that information is going to outweigh potential loss that we might experience from a business standpoint because of how we currently are not where we want to be as a business?
Yeah, I could talk to that. So when I mentioned the environmental profit and loss reports that Keurig is doing, so they are actually doing that right now, and they've seen benefits from doing so because of the pandemic and because of the current climate. A lot of consumers, as seen by the evidence Emily presented later on, they want to know, they want that transparency, they want to see it, and they actually appreciate it more. And if they know what they're buying, they're more likely to go for it and buy it. So as seen by Keurig and Gucci and what they've been doing, it's actually been much more successful, especially with the younger generations.
I think that there's also a merit in identifying that where your brand is now in terms of sustainability is not where you want your brand to be. It signals to consumers that while things may not be perfect, by you owning up to it, you're showing that you want to improve. And as we spoke about with this demographic data, consumers are demanding that. And consumers are going to be increasingly demanding that. And I think there is an inherent value in radical transparency, simply being honest about what your company is doing, what they hope to be doing different, and how they're going to do that differently.
Great. That's it for questions. Just some feedback on the few questions I asked. First, I think you all did a wonderful job presenting the issue. The first question I asked was more that connection to the issue when you're actually presenting the data for the solutions. It was hard for me personally to follow like how specifically this hits on waste, and that's why I asked the question. You did a good job on explaining it on the back end, but in the presentation that might be something that could be helpful from the beginning to bring us back to why this is important. And why this is important is because it is the issue that you're focusing on. And then yeah, just a understanding from the beginning of where we currently are at. That has to do a lot with the how we get to where we want to be as well. So I think that's briefly covered, like, hey, we are doing this not so well, but more data on like what specifically we aren't doing well, so that we can say these short-term goals make sense, this change in philosophy makes sense because we have this understanding of where we currently are at right now. But wonderful job.
Robert, you have any feedback?
Really good presentation. Very well paced. I love the fact that you weren't simply reading slides. You did a good job of tying in additional info and also acknowledging you had deeper information to offer And in fact, you use that deeper information in answering some of our questions. So I think you deserve to be commended for what you showed us today.
Autumn?
Hi. Yeah, so just a couple of notes here. That Instagram ad that you guys put together was really great. I think, when you're speaking to a board of directors, one, yes, financials are big, legal is big, but then how it gets implemented and doing something visual like that is really, really great, because then they can start to see it and imagine what they might do. So that was wonderful. The peer comparison that you did on the recollection program, I would have liked to see maybe another luxury brand that is doing that, or if there isn't one, then that's an opportunity also to tell the board, hey, this is a great opportunity for you to kind of take the lead in this luxury market. And that's a really great PR thing too, so just that little piece of information I really was hoping for, and I didn't see that. And yeah, that was pretty much it. Just on a presentation thing, because I don't know if you guys continue on or whatnot, but just I noticed a couple of times in the presentation, you were using the words they and then other times you. And so I would just, as a piece of feedback there on communication, just stay in character for your presentation. But thank you so much. I think it was really great.
Okay, I guess I'm last, and then I relinquished the camera. Overall, I liked it. I thought it was well prepared and well organized, and that was very good. I would caution you to have in mind when you make presentations like this in the future, who your audience is. You could probably notice by looking at the camera that most of us are older than you are. And as a result of that, we don't share the vocabulary. That's why I asked you the question about stakeholders, because you mentioned stakeholders, which is a concept I'm familiar with. It's not that I'm ignorant about it, but you just assumed that the concept of stakeholder interest is broadly accepted. And I'm here to tell you it's not. In the legal and corporate community, it's got some following, but it's still very much up in the air. So I guess what I'm saying is know your audience and key your pitch to the audience. And if you have to use a term like that, define it. Okay, very good. Thank you all for your attention.